Hello, Mohammed.
Hello.
How are you today?
Very well.
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure being here.
So tell me, what is the Dubai police doing with blockchain?
Okay. I'm the head of Firearms and Toolmarks Section at the General Department of Forensic Science and Criminology. And in forensics, there are many applications that you can work with. But especially in firearms, we are working on a little bit of a proof of concept, if you will, that allows us to trace firearms internationally. As you know, organized crime may have firearms involved moving from one country to another. Similarly, we examine ballistics fingerprints, and that allows us to determine that this specific bullet came out of this specific firearm.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how that works exactly?
Yeah, sure. It's trust me, it's time consuming. It's not easy as it may look, but the way that it happens is we recover a bullet from a crime scene or a cartridge case. And once a firearm is submitted to us, we actually test fire it in a water tank. And then we get that specific bullet that we shot and the bullet that came out of a comparison, the crime scene. And we use something called the comparison microscope to look at two objects simultaneously. And if the ballistics fingerprint were both the same, that means both of them came out of the same source.
So it's like a very microscopic study of little scratches.
Exactly, and this the scientific term for that is striations.
Striations, not scratches.
Yeah.
Okay, and like, why should we put this on the blockchain?
All right, very nice. So this process that I just mentioned is time intensive, and the way we search all our previous crimes, previous firearms, is we use something called an automated ballistics identification system. And what that does, is it scans the ballistics fingerprint of a bullet or a cartridge case and allows us to search an entire database. And it shows us the top 20 most similar marks. And then we need to manually sit down and confirm that under the microscope again. However, the challenge occurs when you have two law enforcement in different states, different countries, trying to communicate to each other. If they're not using the same system, then they won't be able to search each other's database. If they're not using similar standards, similar issues may occur. And also there is a challenge with regards to translucence, trust, of sharing that data. For example, there is only one existing database when it comes to international ballistics identification systems database. And however, if you do not use that specific product, then you cannot access, search, or share your data. However, blockchain can be that facilitator that we're looking for. It can work on the software rather than the actual hardware that is used for scanning. It can allow us to use access or authorizations to control who actually can share, contribute to that database, or have access to it. Simultaneously, blockchain offers us a unique perspective when sensitive topics such as criminals knowing that their firearms or ballistics fingerprint is actually on that database and maliciously blackmail or bribe that owner of that data in order for them to delete it from the files. So having a public record or a ledger might be the facilitator that we're looking for.
But do you need to, say with the different systems of keeping the ballistics data, would you also need to, other than putting them on the blockchain, perhaps like bridging them, but would you also need to do some other software work to unify them?
Yes, so when it comes to two different systems or more, you need to have at least some sort of standard. And that standard at the moment does not exist. However, when it's using the blockchain for that facilitation, as long as you can interpret the data correctly, then you can resample, rescale it using a format that we use called the X3P. And X3P is not like a fingerprints file where it's literally just 2D, it's a picture. No, the problem with the ballistics fingerprint is it's 3D. So you also have that depth associated with it, and it's a heavy file.
Is that the only type of file?
This is the most universal ISO standard file that is being used at the moment. However, there are other formats that may be used. However, in this research, in this proof of concept, we are trying to figure out what would be the best for the purpose of facilitating this international cooperation amongst automated ballistics identification systems.
So it's almost like making sort of JPEGs and GIFs, or like all compatible, kind of.
Kind of, but those two are 2D.
Yeah, 2D. Yeah. Wow. I imagine that a lot of this data is very sensitive, and I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a lot of law enforcement agencies are not particularly keen on sharing that data. I mean, I can, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, like I can imagine they're quite, not necessarily distrustful, but not immediately trusting of new technologies. Is that something that you have seen, and how would you go about convincing them?
When it comes to how sensitive the information is, as you mentioned, firearms is a little bit of a sensitive topic, and it's always the identified information that is sensitive. So, for example, if you have a picture of literally just a fingerprint, will that mean anything to you? Probably not, unless you know that fingerprint is actually that person's fingerprint. So those databases are unidentified in nature. So it tells you, well, this is the reference number associated with that specific ballistics fingerprint. But it doesn't tell you that, well, this firearm is XYZ's firearm from this country. So that comes into in collaboration with tracking. Or firearm tracing, as we call it. So firearm tracing is a discipline where you need to actually trace physically the firearm from the manufacturer to the shop, who bought it, was it sold to who, or was it actually went off the grid, was it exported, imported, all that mess. So you need to have clean records that are reliable, transparent, and everyone can have an idea of what is going on, because when it comes to tracing, at the moment there are various organizations around the world that have their own data because they are the owners of their data. However, it becomes a sensitive topic when you ask them about something and they don't share. You can imagine if there are political influences or conflict between two different countries, even though they have existing maybe memorandum of understandings or collaboration documents in place, will they actually work together if conflicts were between two countries? Probably not. So to prevent this from happening, blockchain can be the facilitator for also tracing, and it helps us. We can see this with different applications as well in agriculture and many more, where you can use blockchain to determine from the supplier till the end user what actually went wrong and where it happened, for you to instantly try to improve what went wrong earlier.
Are these private companies?
No, most of them are law enforcement.
Okay.
Most of them.
Okay. So it sounds like the tracing of firearms is quite a different process than the ballistics.
Correct. It's actually a different process. However, it comes hand in hand. So the reason why I say this is because firearms examiners actually perform one kind of examination, which is serial number restorations. And sometimes when firearms are used in crimes, their numbers are removed, obliterated, And we restore those numbers using physical, magnetic, chemical restoration methods. And this is why it is important to have the forensics examiners on board to successfully identify what make, model, caliber is this specific firearm. There are specific marks called proof marks, military acceptance marks that you would not necessarily pay attention to on a firearm, but it can actually tell you more information than you would expect. That this firearm actually was manufactured in this country but tested in another. The army of another country may have actually adopted that firearm, and so on.
But this kind of more like detective work cannot be put on the blockchain, or it's harder than just the ballistics?
It can. You may have another application just for tracing. And this is something we're definitely looking into because, as I mentioned earlier, it's at the moment the status quo is everyone has their own data. And even if you have part of that puzzle, you need the whole picture to understand what's actually going on.
How do you see this being used for other types of, criminology or like?
Yeah, I mean, another thing is similar to notaries. Sometimes agencies or countries or states may have a problem with authenticizing a specific forensics report that may be sent to the court. However, using blockchain, you can easily do that, check if it's the updated version or not, and so on. The opportunities are endless when it comes to blockchain. However, I strongly believe that blockchain is a technology that will help facilitate reaching those goals really fast.
And what about the coordination aspect of that? Because if we expand this logic, this technology to a lot of other types of data, then perhaps things are getting a little bit more, even more sensitive, right? We're going into privacy issues. We're going into the fact that there are things that are crimes in one country that are not in another, perhaps sort of issues around civil liberties and human rights. Do you feel like using blockchain makes these problems better or worse?
It actually helps facilitate those problems. So it can, one example to make it really clear is blockchain can introduce specific information that other information is unidentified. So for example, some person might say, well, my sex or gender or my age is something sensitive or personal that I don't like to share, or my religion. And blockchain will actually allow the other party requesting specific information to have access to that specific information on its own. At the same time, when it comes to governance, and we heard this earlier today in the panel discussion, is it introduces a bottom-up approach, not just a top-down approach, where you can use voting to steer the direction of the changing technology based on the needs. At the end of the day, when you come to international cooperation, the guidelines for that cooperation needs to be as agile, as flexible, without, let's say, conflicting with more specific or region-based guidelines.
So like my government could share with your government or another, law enforcement agencies, data about the specific weapon or like data related to the crime, but not necessarily information about me or information
Correct.
that could lead to me being implicated in something
Correct.
else.
And this is something very important when it comes to criminal justice systems all over the world, because we do need to take our due diligence and documentations when it comes to the investigation. However, at the same time, we have an old saying, 10 minutes means 10 kilometers. If you just waste 10 minutes of time in an investigation, that person may well be far away in 10 kilometers. And blockchain can help facilitate reaching those information when it comes to a more objective, non-identified approach. However, when it comes to intelligence and personal data, then obviously the same method of communicating from one governance, from one law enforcement agency or one government to another still remains the same.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Very interesting, Mohammed.
Appreciate
I'm really glad we got to talk about this today.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.